Post 316. Study Session 9. Classification by institutional forms of the state. Introduction. This lecture essentially attempts to examine and discuss another method of comparison by looking at some prominent classifications of government types and types of institutions which operate within governments. For the classification of government types, it will consider such systems of government as aristocracy, monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, and similar others. Learning outcomes. At the end of this study session, it is expected that you should be able to understand certain basic elements of some prominent systems of government, analyze differences between these systems, and adopt them for comparison, and lastly, suggest the most appropriate system for Nigeria. Government institutions. The key types of institutional classification include parliamentary, presidential, unitary, and federal institutional systems. Meanwhile, whichever institutional form is adopted by any modern society, it is important to note that there are three prime institutions or branches of government, namely legislature, executive, and judiciary, which are concerned with different specific functions. Legislature. This branch is responsible for making and changing laws, legislations, or regulations. In Britain, for example, the legislature consists of three sections of parliament: the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and the Crown. While in Nigeria, the National Assembly is made up of the Senate and House of Representatives at the federal level and at the state level, and the State House of Assembly. Executive. This branch is responsible for the general direction of government and for administering the laws prepared by the legislature. This branch is widely considered as the government, since it consists of the leaders of the state and those responsible for the day-to-day or everyday running of the state. In Nigeria, the president is the head of this arm at the federal level, while the governor is the head at the state level. Judiciary. This is the branch that is responsible for interpreting the law, settling disputes between people, and imposing penalties in cases where the law have not been observed. Before we delve into a detailed explanation of the four, that is the unitary, federal, presidential, and parliamentary institutional forms of the state that were highlighted in the preceding section, we need to note that the adoption of any particular institutional structure in a state is due partly to historical factors and partly to the wishes of the particular communities. Unitary system. This generally occurs in a society that is comparatively homogeneous in character. In essence, it means that there are no sharp linguistic, racial, or religious differences between sections of the population. All powers and authority for the exercise of the functions of the state are concentrated in the hands of the central government. The various areas into which the state is divided for administrative purposes are created by the central government, that is, centralization. However, the powers and boundaries can also be altered by the legislatures. France, Britain, and New Zealand are good examples of countries operating the unitary system. Federal system. Federal comes from a Sanskrit word meaning to unite. The federal system often exists where the people are not ready to surrender all powers to a central government. It is well adapted to states with wide areas where there are sectional diversities of race, language, nationality, religion, and geography. For example, Switzerland has 3 nationalities and 3 official languages: French, German, and Italian, and 2 religions. In Australia, although there are unifying influences of common nationality and common language, federalism is still adopted because of the 6 colonies that came together to form the country and had a history of separate governments. Other examples of countries that have adopted the federal system include the United States of America, Canada, Germany, and India, among others. Nigeria is also a federal state, but its long experience under military rule distorted many aspects of its practice of federalism. It is important to note that under the federal practice, authority for government is divided between the federal, that is central government, and various regional or state governments. The specific powers and functions of each level of government are defined in a written constitution. In other words, it is a common practice that the federal constitution is written. In summary, most federal states have certain characteristics that may be necessary for us to highlight, and they include: 1. Supremacy of the Constitution. In simple terms, neither the central nor the regional government should have the right to ignore or amend the Constitution by itself to suit its own purposes. 2. Supremacy of the central government in cases of conflict. For example, certain powers, exclusive, are conferred on the central government: control of the army, currency or legal tender, airports, foreign policy, etc., while the rest, that is residual, are left to the regional governments, and they may share authority and responsibilities. 3. Bicameral legislature. At least 2 houses or arms of parliament must exist, one for each level of government. 4. Right of secession generally denied. No federal constitution, so far, except that of the Soviet Union, grants federating units the right to secede. The American and Nigerian civil wars were, for instance, fought on the issue of secession. In the United States of America, John Calhoun championed the cause of the southern slave states, while Emeka Ojukwu fought for the Igbos, that is the Biafrans, in Nigeria. 5. Judicial interpretation of the Constitution. Generally, the authority of the federal judiciary is recognized, especially in cases of conflict over jurisdiction between the regional and federal governments. In Nigeria, for example, the Federal Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court intervened at different points in time to resolve issues of revenue allocation, resource control, local government creation, etc., between the states and the federal government. Presidential and parliamentary systems. Other important institutional classifications which could be useful to students of comparative politics include the presidential system and parliamentary system. In the presidential system, the executive as a branch of government is separate from and equal to the legislature. Each chief officer in Nigeria, for example, is the president at the federal level, while at the state level is the governor, and at the local government level, he is the chairman. Each is supposed to be chosen by the people, that is the electorate, rather than by the legislative branch. The president acts both as the head of government and as the ceremonial head of state. The principle of separation of powers is generally followed. On the other hand, in the parliamentary system, there is no strict separation of powers, and the legislature is the source of authority for the executive. The government, its committee of leading members, and the cabinet are chosen from among the representatives of the majority party or coalition group elected to the legislature. The government, headed by the Prime Minister, is responsible to the Parliament for its actions and dependent on the support of the legislature to remain in office. Usually, the legislature can overthrow a government by passing a vote of no confidence. While a parliamentary system is likely to be most successful if there are not too many parties, it can be unstable if the existence of too many parties means that a coalition government has to be formed. Such was the case in the French Fourth Republic, in which there were frequent changes because members felt less loyal than if they were members of single-party cabinets. Most European countries and others influenced by British form of government operate this system. As a former British colony, Nigeria also practiced the parliamentary system in its First Republic. Finally, other modes of classification can be based on written and unwritten constitution. Study session summary. In this lecture, we discuss the presidential system, in which the president is both the head of state and head of government. Unlike the parliamentary system, with the prime minister as head of government, while there is also a ceremonial head of state and president. For the federal structure or federal institutional system, as in USA, Canada, and to a lesser extent, Nigeria, powers and authority are dispersed between different co-equal and coordinate regions, such as the federal, state, and local governments. While in the unitary system, that is more popular in relatively homogeneous societies like Britain and France, powers and authority are centralized. End of study session 9. Thank you for listening.